The journey of love is sacred, but it is not without peril. Love that does not nourish, expand, and elevate the soul is not love. It is attachment in disguise, and yet, let us not demonize our past. Even toxic relationships are teachers. They reveal the unconscious. They show us our wounds. They force us to confront what we could not face alone. The question is not, why did this happen to me? The question is, what is this teaching me about who I am? Every relationship is a mirror. The ones that heal reflect our light. The ones that wound reflect our shadow. Both are necessary, but only one must remain. I urge you, do not be afraid to walk away from what dims your soul. Do not cling to what was never meant to last. And do not confuse suffering for destiny. Each of us carries within us a part of the psyche that we do not readily acknowledge, a darker, hidden side of our personality made up of repressed desires, fears, instincts, and impulses. This is what is known as the shadow. The shadow is not evil by nature, but it consists of everything the conscious self refuses to accept about itself. Because we do not integrate the shadow consciously, it often finds other routes to expression, especially through our closest relationships. In romantic connections, particularly those that turn toxic, the shadow is rarely silent. What we refuse to face within ourselves is inevitably projected outward onto others. In relationships, our partner becomes the most convenient and frequent recipient of these projections. This is not a conscious act. One does not deliberately assign their hidden insecurities or anger to their partner. It happens unconsciously, subtly, and powerfully. We begin to see in them the very things we disown in ourselves. If I carry within me unacknowledged feelings of inadequacy, for example, I might begin to accuse my partner of making me feel small or unworthy, even when they have done nothing to justify such a charge. If I deny my own anger, I might start perceiving my partner as constantly hostile or aggressive. The outer conflict becomes a reflection of the inner war. This projection of the shadow distorts reality. We are no longer seeing the other person as they truly are. We are seeing them through a filter of our own unconscious material. The result is confusion, miscommunication, and emotional chaos. Every word, gesture, or silence can be misinterpreted. The relationship becomes a hall of mirrors in which we are no longer relating to a partner, but to our own fears and wounds in disguise. We lash out or withdraw not because of what is happening in the present moment, but because of what we are trying to avoid seeing within ourselves. In a toxic relationship, this projection is often mutual. Both individuals begin to offload their unresolved emotions and past traumas onto one another. The dynamic becomes a closed loop of blame, guilt, shame, and resentment. No one sees the other clearly. Both are trapped in a cycle of mutual unconsciousness. Arguments become less about actual events and more about deeper, unresolved pain. And because neither partner recognizes that the conflict originates within, each believes the other is the true source of suffering. When the shadow remains unexamined, love becomes toxic. The relationship ceases to be a space of growth and healing, and instead turns into a battlefield where the unconscious seeks dominance. True intimacy becomes impossible because projection always stands in the way. We do not want to love another. We want the other to carry what we cannot bear ourselves. Yet there is a gift hidden within this darkness. The projection of the shadow, when recognized, can be the beginning of profound self-awareness. If one is willing to pause and ask, "What part of me am I seeing in the other?" then the toxic pattern can become a portal to healing. By withdrawing projection and facing the shadow directly, we begin to reclaim the energy we have unknowingly given away. The relationship may then either transform into a conscious partnership, or it may end, but not in bitterness. It ends with understanding. The shadow teaches us through pain, and toxic relationships are often its sharpest lesson. But until we face the truth of our own darkness, we will keep encountering it in the face of the one we claim to love. In every authentic relationship, there exists a delicate balance between togetherness and individuality. Love, in its highest form, is not the fusion of two people into one indistinguishable entity, but the respectful dance of two whole individuals who choose to walk a shared path. When this balance is honored, both partners are free to grow, explore, and express their unique essence. But in a toxic relationship, that sacred balance collapses. One or both individuals begin to lose themselves, not by accident, but as a silent sacrifice made in the name of preserving the bond. At first, this loss of individuality may appear harmless. It often begins with compromise, which is natural and necessary in any relationship. But when compromise becomes chronic self-denial, when your needs, voice, and identity are continually suppressed to avoid conflict or abandonment, you begin to disappear. The erosion of the self happens gradually, like water carving into stone. You stop pursuing your dreams. You silence your opinions. You change how you speak, how you dress, even how you think, just to maintain peace or to be more lovable in the eyes of your partner. The tragedy is that this sacrifice is rarely demanded openly. More often, it is internalized through subtle cues, emotional manipulation, or unspoken expectations. You may begin to feel guilty for wanting space, ashamed for expressing a different opinion, or fearful of asserting your independence. Slowly, the relationship becomes a container that restricts rather than expands, a space where conformity is rewarded and authenticity punished. This suppression of the self is deeply damaging. The psyche cannot thrive in captivity. When individuality is denied, life becomes stale, relationships lose their vitality, and the soul begins to protest. This protest can appear as anxiety, depression, irritability, or a profound sense of restlessness. These symptoms are not merely emotional disturbances. They are the language of the deeper self trying to alert you that you have betrayed your own truth. In toxic dynamics, this loss of individuality is often reinforced by a partner who, whether consciously or unconsciously, fears your growth. They may feel threatened when you pursue a new passion, make new friends, or even assert a simple boundary. To maintain control or security, they may try to keep you small, sometimes through criticism, sometimes through praise that subtly redirects you back into a mold that serves them. What is presented as love becomes control in disguise, and the longer you remain in such an environment, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before the relationship began. But let us not forget, the need to be accepted and loved is deeply rooted in all of us. It is not weakness to long for connection, to bend a little in the face of love. However, when we betray our essence to maintain that connection, the relationship begins to resemble a form of emotional captivity. Love should never require that you give up the most sacred parts of who you are. To reclaim individuality in the midst of a toxic relationship requires great courage. It means turning inward and asking, where did I begin to disappear? What parts of myself have I locked away for the sake of being loved? These questions are not easy. They may shake the very foundation of the relationship. But they are essential, for without the freedom to be yourself, there can be no genuine connection. Only dependency, fear, and illusion. In truth, the healthiest relationships are those in which both people are encouraged to become more fully themselves, not less. Where love is not a contract of submission but a covenant of mutual respect, where the flame of individuality is not extinguished but fueled, a relationship that requires you to diminish who you are is not love. It is a quiet form of self-erasure. And the soul, in time, will always seek to return to its full, undivided expression. In every human being lies a vast reservoir of emotional energy, powerful, instinctive, often ancient in origin. Emotions are the soul's messengers, guiding us toward deeper awareness, alerting us to what matters, and connecting us to the depths of ourselves and others. However, in a toxic relationship, these emotions often cease to be messengers and become masters. Rather than being understood, they are unleashed, Rather than being integrated, they possess us. The result is emotional possession, a state in which we are no longer responding from a place of consciousness, but reacting from a place of primal, unchecked force. In such relationships, strong emotions like jealousy, anger, fear, or anxiety frequently arise without clear cause or proportion. An innocent word becomes a trigger. A delayed text message is interpreted as betrayal. A moment of silence is seen as rejection. These emotional responses are not rooted in the present moment, but are deeply connected to unresolved wounds, unmet childhood needs, and unconscious patterns. And instead of being examined and understood, they are projected outward and acted upon. Possession by emotion is not mere moodiness or sensitivity. It is a form of inner domination. The self becomes temporarily hijacked by an archetypal force. When a partner explodes in rage, accuses without reason, or breaks down in fear repeatedly, what we are witnessing is not simply their personality at work. It is a deeper psychological force overwhelming their ego. In these moments, they are no longer choosing how to behave. They are being swept away by a torrent of emotional energy they do not fully understand. In toxic dynamics, both partners may find themselves in cycles of such possession. One person's anxiety may fuel the other's frustration. One's neediness may trigger the other's withdrawal. The emotions feed on each other like wild flames, creating a loop of escalating reactions. In time, even small disagreements ignite intense arguments. Emotional safety disappears. Communication becomes nearly impossible. There is only survival, defending, attacking, withdrawing, and repeating. But the deeper tragedy lies in what this emotional possession obscures, the truth. When gripped by these forces, we lose the capacity to listen, to reflect, to empathize. We do not see the other person clearly. We do not even see ourselves clearly. We are too consumed by the storm. And over time, the emotional intensity can become addictive. The highs and lows, the makeups and breakdowns, create a rhythm that feels passionate, but is in fact deeply destabilizing. Many people mistake this volatility for real intimacy, believing that strong emotion equals strong love. But this is not love, it is emotional chaos masked as connection. To escape this pattern, one must first recognize when possession is taking place. This requires radical self-honesty. When you feel overcome with jealousy, for instance, ask not only what did my partner do, but what am I afraid of losing? What past pain is being awakened in me? To reclaim emotional sovereignty is to pause, reflect, and refuse to act until clarity returns. It is to take responsibility for the energy moving through you, even if it is uncomfortable. Equally important is cultivating a space in the relationship where both partners are committed to emotional awareness. In healthy relationships, strong emotions still arise, but they are held with compassion, not weaponized. Partners learn to say, "This is how I feel," rather than "this is what you've done." They seek understanding rather than victory, and in doing so, they invite growth rather than destruction. In contrast, toxic relationships feed on unconscious emotion. They thrive on drama, blame, and avoidance. The emotional storm becomes the center of gravity. Until both individuals are willing to examine the roots of their reactivity, they will remain caught in a loop of possession, confusion, and pain. Ultimately, emotional possession is a signal, a cry from the unconscious that something deeper needs to be seen, heard, and healed. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to integrate it. When we learn to feel without being ruled, we reclaim the power to love consciously. And only then can true relationship begin. Within the human psyche reside ancient, universal patterns of behavior and personality archetypes. These archetypes are not invented by us. They are inherited structures of the unconscious, shared across cultures and generations. They manifest in our dreams, our instincts, our relationships. When we live with awareness, these archetypes become sources of wisdom and strength. But when they operate unconsciously, when we are unaware of their influence, They begin to dominate and distort our behavior, especially within intimate relationships. In toxic partnerships, two of the most disruptive archetypes often take control: the trickster and the eternal child. The trickster archetype is mischievous, deceptive, and chaotic. It thrives on disruption, illusion, and manipulation. When this archetype takes hold in a relationship, honesty becomes elusive. One or both partners begin to play games, twist the truth, avoid accountability, or create confusion to maintain control. Promises are made but not kept. Reality is bent to suit personal convenience. The trickster feeds on power imbalances, using charm or victimhood to deflect blame and evade responsibility. What appears on the surface to be a minor white lie or a clever excuse is, in reality, a defense mechanism, one that protects the ego from vulnerability but destroys trust. The problem with the trickster is not its existence. It is necessary, at times, for creativity and adaptation. But when it governs the relationship, it becomes toxic. Communication breaks down, not because the words aren't spoken, but because truth is absent. The partner possessed by the trickster archetype avoids intimacy through distraction and distortion. They might gaslight, shift blame, or use emotional manipulation as tools to maintain their own narrative. The relationship becomes less about connection and more about survival, a chess game rather than a dance. Alongside the trickster, the eternal child, also called the pure eterness or Peter Pan archetype, often takes center stage in toxic dynamics. This archetype resists responsibility, seeks constant pleasure, avoids commitment, and refuses to grow up. The eternal child may be charming, passionate, and full of dreams, but they often lack the maturity to follow through on their commitments. When this archetype is dominant in a relationship, one partner becomes the parent, the caretaker, the rescuer, while the other remains perpetually dependent, evasive, and emotionally immature. The burden of responsibility, emotional labor, and decision-making falls on one side, while the other drifts, complains, or makes excuses. Over time, resentment builds. The partner playing the adult grows tired of parenting their lover. They may begin to feel unloved, unseen, or used. And the one trapped in the eternal child archetype begins to feel controlled, suffocated, or criticized, which only reinforces their desire to escape further into fantasy or avoidance. These archetypes are not inherently bad. The trickster brings innovation and challenge. The eternal child brings hope and wonder. But in their unconscious forms, they prevent true intimacy from forming. They turn the relationship into a theater of avoidance, deceit, and dependency. To recognize these patterns is the first step toward healing. Ask yourself, are you always cleaning up the messes your partner leaves behind? Do you feel like you're never told the full truth? Do you find yourself playing roles, like the savior, the victim, the critic, or the rebel, instead of simply being present as yourself? These are signs that archetypal forces have taken over, pushing the real self into the background. Transformation begins when we reclaim these archetypes consciously. The trickster can learn to be honest. The eternal child can grow into the wise adult. But this requires awareness, willingness, and the courage to face discomfort. It requires both partners to take responsibility for their own emotional development. In a healthy relationship, archetypes serve the soul. They do not rule it. But in a toxic relationship, they become the puppet masters, pulling the strings of chaos behind the scenes. Until we recognize and integrate them, we remain caught in a performance, never truly seeing each other and never truly being seen. One of the most insidious signs of a toxic relationship lies in the progressive erosion of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are the essential lines of emotional, mental, and even physical separation that define where one person ends and another begins. They are necessary for the development of a healthy self and the maintenance of respectful, conscious relationships. When boundaries are honored, love has room to breathe, and each person can flourish in their individuality. But in toxic dynamics, these boundaries are not respected. They are violated, dismissed, or simply erased. Boundary erosion does not always begin with overt abuse or extreme behavior. Often, it starts subtly under the guise of love, passion, or intimacy. A partner may say things like, "If you really loved me, you'd tell me everything," or "Why do you need time alone? Don't you enjoy being with me?" These statements may appear innocent or even affectionate at first, but over time, they create an environment where emotional independence is questioned, privacy is invaded, and personal limits are dismissed. The toxic partner begins to assume control over your time, your space, your choices, even your thoughts. This erosion can manifest in many forms. It might be a refusal to accept your no as a complete answer. It might be constant checking of your phone, social media, or messages under the excuse of trust. It might be the undermining of your decisions, mocking of your values, or criticizing your friends and family to isolate you. It might be emotional coercion, using guilt, fear, or shame to make you feel responsible for their happiness or emotional state. Slowly, your world begins to shrink, and your ability to say, "This is who I am, and this is what I need," becomes weaker, quieter, and eventually silent. What makes this dynamic so dangerous is that it often disguises itself as closeness. The toxic partner may insist that total access to your life is a sign of deep love. They may become offended or hurt when you ask for space or express a need that doesn't include them. They may frame your attempts to assert a boundary as rejection or betrayal. And because most of us long for connection, we may start to believe that sacrifice is necessary for love, that to set a boundary is to push love away. But this is a falsehood. Boundaries are not rejections of love. They are the very conditions that allow love to thrive. Without them, a relationship becomes suffocating, codependent, and destructive. You may begin to feel as if you are losing yourself, becoming a version of someone that only exists to please, to calm, or to appease the other. Your desires fade into the background. Your instincts become dulled. Your sense of reality becomes distorted, shaped not by your inner truth, but by the expectations and emotional climate created by your partner. The restoration of boundaries is essential for healing. It begins with awareness, recognizing where your limits have been crossed and identifying the ways you have been conditioned to ignore or suppress your own needs. It continues with courage, the willingness to speak up, to draw lines, and to face the fear that you might be punished or abandoned for doing so. And finally, it requires consistency, standing by your truth even when it is uncomfortable, even when others resist. A healthy partner will respect your boundaries, not challenge them. They will welcome your autonomy, not resent it. They will understand that intimacy does not require invasion, and that true connection honors difference rather than demanding sameness. Love, in its truest form, does not consume the other. It creates a sacred space where both can grow. In toxic relationships, the loss of boundaries is not merely a relational issue. It is a spiritual crisis. It severs the connection to your inner authority, your sense of self, your soul, and the longer you remain in that space, the more difficult it becomes to remember who you truly are. Reclaiming your boundaries, then, is not just an act of protection. It is an act of self-reclamation. It is a return to the center of your being, where no one else decides your worth, your truth, or your path. One of the most deceptive features of a toxic relationship is the illusion of change. This illusion often keeps people stuck in a cycle of hope and despair, unable to fully leave a situation that is causing them psychological harm. The toxic partner may frequently promise to change, apologize for their behavior, or show fleeting moments of affection and understanding that seem to hint at a better future. These moments offer emotional relief and temporarily ease the pain, but they are rarely accompanied by genuine, sustained transformation. Instead, They become part of a repetitive pattern, a cycle of emotional highs and lows that mirrors the dynamics of addiction. Hope is a powerful force. It is essential for healing and growth, and it can carry us through the darkest of times. But when hope is placed in fantasy rather than reality, it becomes a trap. In toxic relationships, hope is often not based on what is, but on what could be, what the partner might become, what the relationship might feel like if only things were different. This type of hope is not rooted in truth, but in projection. It is a longing for potential rather than acceptance of reality. This illusion of progress is often sustained by emotionally manipulative behavior. The toxic partner may become especially attentive after a period of mistreatment. They may give grand apologies, offer gifts, or express sudden vulnerability. These gestures can feel incredibly validating, as if the relationship is finally taking a turn for the better. But they are often strategic, meant to reset the emotional balance and prevent you from walking away. Once the immediate threat of separation has passed, the toxic behavior gradually returns, sometimes subtly, sometimes with force, and the cycle continues. This dynamic closely resembles the psychological pattern of intermittent reinforcement, in which unpredictable rewards make us more deeply attached. Just as a gambler continues to play in the hopes of hitting the jackpot, even after repeated losses, someone in a toxic relationship clings to the hope that the good times will return. The moments of love and connection become the bait, reinforcing attachment even in the presence of recurring harm. This is not love, it is emotional conditioning. What makes this even more dangerous is that the person in the toxic relationship may begin to question their own perception. Maybe I'm overreacting, they think. Maybe it is getting better. They doubt their instincts, override their boundaries, and endure mistreatment in the hope that the relationship is finally evolving. They become emotionally invested not in the relationship as it truly exists, but in an imagined version of it, one that is always just slightly out of reach. Real change, however, does not happen in a single conversation or grand gesture. It is not a promise or an apology. Real change is slow, consistent, uncomfortable, and accountable. It involves deep self-reflection, commitment to growth, and a willingness to face painful truths, not just for one partner, but for both. If your partner shows improvement only when they fear losing you, but reverts to harmful patterns as soon as you stay, that is not change. That is manipulation. To move beyond the illusion of progress requires clarity and courage. It means looking at patterns rather than promises. It means asking yourself, has anything fundamentally changed? Or am I simply being pulled back into another cycle? It also means grieving the potential of the relationship, the dream of what it could have been, and choosing instead to live in the truth of what it is. Breaking this cycle is not easy. It may feel like letting go of something beautiful, even if that beauty was only ever glimpsed in fragments. But in truth, you are not letting go of love. You are letting go of an illusion. And in doing so, you open yourself to something far more powerful, the possibility of a life rooted in honesty, stability, and emotional safety. A relationship that truly serves the soul does not rely on fantasy. It grows in reality, with both people standing as they truly are, imperfect, accountable, awake. Illusions may comfort for a time, but only truth can heal.